I'm Trevor, this is Everyday Torah, and welcome to downtown Boise, Idaho. I'm here at Freak Alley. It's a really beautiful place, but there's a lot going on here, and I think it's a little bit like church history. To see if we can sort it all out. So, if we're going to understand church history, one of the first things we need to do is understand where the word church came from. How did we get from synagogue to this? Or a Protestant church like this one. Why do they call this church and not synagogue? Let's take a look. Well, in the New Testament, the thing is, the word church is only kind of sort of there. The real word in Greek is Ecclesia, and it just means assembly. And it can be any kind of assembly. Called out people of some sort. In fact, scholars think that Ecclesia originated in Athens, where men 18 years and over would come to their demos, or their village, to Kratia, which means to rule. So if you put demos and Kratia together, that's where we get our modern day word democracy. So it's just a gathering of people of some sort, and that's what the Apostle Paul used. So you might be thinking, why does any of it matter? Church, assembly, who even cares? Well, it matters if you think that the church, that assembly, is somehow different than the assembly of the Old Testament. During the Old Testament times, people came and worshiped God. It was an assembly. The Hebrew word is kahal. It just means called out people to come worship God. Ecclesia is exactly the same word. I mean, there's really no difference. So the church didn't replace the assembly of the Old Testament. It's one people all the way through. It began way back with Adam and Eve, and those who found a relationship with God, well, they're the assembly. The New Testament is exactly the same thing. So what gives? Why do we use the word church? Most scholars think it came from an Old English word, circe or cerise, and that seems to be derived from kyriakon, which just means pertaining to the Lord. So if you think about it, if you're part of the Roman government, they were a little more, harsh back then. And if you came against the government, off with your head. And so you would want to make really certain that everyone around you knew, both the government and you, that you weren't there to rule in the worldly sense. You were only there to gather to worship God. And that's what the word church fundamentally does. It separates out a people assembled for the purpose of religious worship or worshiping God from the purpose of civil discourse. So these guys went with the word house, which is pretty cool really, because I think they probably understand that it's just the word assembly. But is there anything inherently wrong with the word church? No, as long as you understand that assembly, ecclesia, kahol, even synagogue in James chapter 2 verse 2, that's the word that James uses. As long as you understand that it's all the same thing, then it's really no big deal. So at this point, I want to draw at least a few initial conclusions for you. They won't be exhaustive, I'm just going to make statements, but it's something I want you to think about as we move on to other videos. Number one, the ecclesia, the assembly, really is a worshiping community. And the church fathers and mothers, we got to hand it to them. They really did stand up for the faith, and we can all appreciate that. But number two, we really should be engaged in civil discourse. Now, sometimes Rome, they could be really mean. Other governments could be mean, and so they kind of kept out of each other's hair. And because sometimes the Jews were really mean to Christians, they didn't really want anything to do with God's Torah. But see, that's the thing. God's instruction for how Jesus lived is all in that Torah. And so we kind of lost that part, kind of went to the wayside. And because of that, it's hard to engage in civil discourse when you don't really know what you're talking about. Who could do that? King David, King Hezekiah. They did a great job of having a circumcised heart, obviously, and they also followed God's instructions, and they knew how to rule. And interestingly, the United States, actually founded on Judeo-Christian principles, had a really good thing going. We're losing that, but we started really well. And then the final thing is that the assembly, the ecclesia, it didn't start at Pentecost. The Spirit was given, and for good reason, and it's awesome. And I'm going to tell you all about that in another video, but to say that the church started at Pentecost would just not be right. I mean, would you want to tell Ruth, Esther, Abraham that they weren't a part of the assembly? That just wouldn't make any sense. So what then is the called out assembly? It's anyone, past, present, or future, who's grafted into the family of God by the blood of a Passover lamb, that would be Jesus, for the purpose of walking not into the narrative of the world, but instead the narrative of the kingdom, which has to do with salvation, sanctification, and glorification, and all celebrates the work and power of Messiah Yeshua. That's Jesus Christ.
Hey, and shout out to Boise, Idaho. If you live here, you live in a cool city.
Hey, so welcome to Everyday Torah.